All right, diving in. We're taking on man's search for meaning
Oh,
today.
a powerful one, this book.
You picked a heavy hitter.
Hmm.
It really gets into life, suffering, finding meaning when things get rough,
Yeah, not exactly a beach read.
but it'll make you think, that's for sure. And that's what we're here for, right? Not a lecture, but those aha moments that stick with you.
Absolutely. The kind that shift your perspective.
Exactly. So, before we get too far, helps to know where Frankel's coming from, background, and all that.
Definitely. Frankl was a psychiatrist, which adds weight to his observations, right?
Right.
But what makes his perspective even more powerful is that he was a Holocaust survivor. Those experiences in the camps, they really shaped his understanding of what the human spirit can handle. And that's what led him to develop logotherapy.
I mean, wow, to go through that and then come up with a whole new approach to therapy. What was he seeing that sparked this?
Lots of factors. But a key one was that even in those horrific circumstances, people still had this drive to find meaning. He saw it firsthand. Those who held on to a sense of purpose, even something small, like wanting to see a loved one again, they were more likely to survive.
So it's not just about, like, basic survival instincts.
No, it's deeper than that. This was a contrast to Freud's focus on pleasure or avoiding pain. Frankl thought meaning was a much stronger drive.
So instead of just chasing good feelings, he's saying we're wired for something deeper, something that gives us purpose.
That's the core of it, yeah. That innate will to meaning is more powerful than just seeking comfort.
I can see that. I mean, everyone wants their life to mean something, right? Makes me think of his account of life in the camps, though. It's intense. The selection process becoming just a number, the gas chambers, it's hard to imagine finding meaning there.
It's tough to grasp, for sure, and Frankl doesn't sugarcoat it, but his book isn't just about the suffering.
Okay, so it's not just a memoir of the horrors.
No, it's about how, even in the face of those horrors, the human spirit can find meaning, survive, but also find something more.
How did he see that happening? What was he observing?
Well, he talks about three psychological phases the prisoners went through. First, there's shock and denial. Thrown into that brutal environment, the mind can't even process it.
The total overload.
Exactly. Then comes phase two, apathy and emotional detachment. You've lost everything familiar, identity, possessions, control. Kind of a numbness sets in.
It's got to be a defense mechanism, right? To cope.
You're right, it is. But it can be dangerous, too, becoming disconnected, almost robotic. And then liberation comes, and that's phase three, depersonalization. You have to reintegrate into normal life.
Which I bet is way harder than it sounds.
Absolutely. Not just, oh, I'm free, everything's fine. The trauma runs deep.
And you can see these phases in the stories he tells, like when he finds his manuscript, his life's work, just tossed in a pile. Heartbreaking.
Totally speaks to that loss of identity, purpose. But even then, there were glimmers of hope. The moments of humor he describes, joking with a friend about life after liberation.
Humor in a place like that, that's wild.
It speaks to our resilience, Even in darkness, that human spark remains. And that leads to something Frankl keeps coming back to. Even when everything's stripped away, we still have one freedom left.
The last human freedom.
That's it. The freedom to choose our attitude, our response, no matter the situation. Powerful stuff. Makes you think, where do you see this freedom in your own life? Even small ways, we all have this choice.
It's true, we get so caught up in our circumstances and forget we have that choice. Frankel's a good reminder. And that choice leads to a big theme, finding meaning in suffering. Logotherapy doesn't pretend suffering doesn't exist, right?
No, not at all. It acknowledges suffering as part of life. It doesn't sugarcoat it.
So it's not about avoiding pain at all costs.
The key is to find meaning in it. Not toxic positivity, but recognizing that even when things are tough, we can transcend our circumstances. Find something that makes the suffering bearable, even purposeful.
Like when Frankl found solace in thinking of his wife. Not ignoring reality, but finding strength from something bigger.
A perfect example. Shows how love can be a source of resilience, even in dark times.
It's like when things get tough, we need to hold on to those connections, those sources of love even more.
Absolutely. Meaning isn't always found alone, It can be in our connections, our contributions to something larger.
So it's less about searching for meaning on our own and more about understanding our place in the bigger picture.
Perfectly put. Meaning's constantly evolving, something we create throughout life.
That's actually pretty empowering. We have the power to shape our own experience, even when things are tough.
Exactly. No external force can truly take that away from us.
It's like, even in the face of something as awful as what Frankl went through, that human drive to find meaning can still be there.
That's the heart of man's search for meaning, wouldn't you say?
A powerful message. Challenging but hopeful. We've talked a lot about the concepts, but what about the practical side? I know he talks about techniques for cultivating that will to meaning in everyday life.
Ah, yes. Want to dive into those?
Let's do it. I bet our listeners are ready to hear how to actually use these ideas.
Yeah, he gives us some tools. One that I find helpful is called de-reflection.
De-reflection. Okay. What's that all about?
It's good for anxiety, feeling stuck. The idea is sometimes the more we focus on a problem, the bigger it seems.
Oh, like when you can't sleep and you just keep thinking about how you can't sleep.
Exactly. Insomnia, performance anxiety, it gets worse when we overthink. Becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy.
With the de-reflection, we're, what, trying to not think about it?
In a way, yeah. You shift your attention away from the problem towards something else, something meaningful, engaging.
Instead of the symptom, we focus on a purpose. Like what you focus on expands, that kind of thing.
Exactly. It's about identifying what really matters to us, what gives us meaning.
So like instead of obsessing over falling asleep, you might visualize a peaceful place or listen to calming music.
Perfect example. Or, if you're nervous about a presentation, you could focus on the value of the information you're sharing.
Not ignoring the problem, but approaching it differently.
That's the key. Frankl also talks about Socratic dialogue.
Sounds very philosophical.
It is, but also practical. Having a dialogue with yourself, asking those tough questions, helps you figure out your values, motivations, what gives your life meaning.
So it's like actively questioning ourselves instead of just going through the motions.
Yes, introspection, self-discovery, asking things like, what are my talents? How can I use them to make a difference? What are my values? What kind of legacy do I want to leave behind?
Wow, those are big questions.
They are, but they can lead to real insights. And it's not about finding the right answers, but the process itself. That helps you live more authentically, with more meaning.
And this leads to another point Frankl makes. Meaning isn't just about thinking, it's about action.
Absolutely. He talks about self-transcendence. Meaning comes not from focusing on ourselves, but directing our energy outwards, towards something bigger.
Contributing to something greater than ourselves, whether it's work, relationships, our community.
Exactly. It doesn't have to be grand gestures. Even everyday actions that make a difference, connect us with others, leave the world a bit better.
It's amazing how his ideas, born from such suffering, can be so practical.
It's a roadmap for navigating life, finding meaning even when it's hard. And it's available to everyone.
And that's encouraging. I think for a lot of people, that idea of finding meaning in suffering is a tough one, especially in a culture that's all about avoiding pain.
It's not easy, no. Frankl's not saying to seek out suffering or glorify it, but it's often unavoidable. And when it happens, we have a choice in how we respond.
But how do you find meaning in it without falling into that trap of, like, toxic positivity? I think that's where people struggle.
It starts with acceptance, I think. Accepting that suffering is part of life, it doesn't diminish you. It can even lead to growth, empathy, understanding.
Makes me think of Frankl finding strength in his wife's image again. He wasn't denying the reality, but finding something that transcended the suffering.
Exactly. Shows the power of connection, love as resilience.
Like when we're going through tough times, it's even more important to nurture those relationships, draw strength from that love.
Beautifully said. Meaning isn't always something we find alone. It can be in connection and contributing to something bigger than ourselves.
So again, it's less about that solitary search and more about finding our place in the bigger web of things.
Yes, and recognizing that meaning evolves is something we cultivate throughout life.
That's empowering, you know? We have the power to shape our experience, find meaning even in unexpected places.
That's the beauty of it, and no one can take that away from us.
It's like, even in the face of something as horrific as what Frankl went through, that drive to find meaning, it persists. It can even become stronger.
And that's the essence of man's search for meaning.
It's both challenging and hopeful. It's been really insightful talking about this with you. And to our listeners, we want to hear from you. What resonated? How do you see this will to meaning in your own life? Share your thoughts, questions, those aha moments. We're all in this together. Until next time, keep diving deep. Okay, so give us the how-to. How do we cultivate this will to meaning? What are some of those techniques Frankl talks about?
He's got a few. One I find really helpful is de-reflection.
De-reflection, interesting word. What's that about?
Good for anxiety when you feel stuck. The idea is sometimes the more we obsess over a problem, the worse it gets.
Oh, I know that feeling. Like when you can't sleep and you just keep thinking about how you can't sleep. Makes it worse.
Exactly. Insomnia, stage fright, all that.
Yeah.
Overthinking makes it a self-fulfilling prophecy.
So dereflection is about what? Not thinking about the problem.
Yeah, kind of. You shift your focus away from the problem towards something else, something meaningful, something you can really engage with.
So instead of dwelling on the symptom, you find a purpose to focus on.
You got it. It's about remembering what really matters to us, those sources of meaning that ground us when things get tough.
So instead of stressing about falling asleep, you could picture a peaceful place or listen to calming music.
Exactly. Or if you're nervous about a presentation, you focus on how the information you're sharing could help people.
It's not about pretending the problem doesn't exist, but shifting your perspective.
That's it. Frankl also talks about something called Socratic dialogue.
Now that sounds intense.
It's got a philosophical vibe, but it's really practical. It's about having a conversation with yourself, asking those tough questions that help you uncover what really matters.
Okay, so like self-reflection, digging deep.
Yeah, introspection. Asking things like, what are my talents? How can I use them to help others? What are my values? What kind of legacy do I want to leave?
Whoa, those are some deep questions.
They'll get you thinking, that's for sure. And it's not about finding the right answer, it's the process, the asking. That helps you live a more authentic life, a life with more meaning.
This connects to another thing Frankl talks about. Meaning isn't just about thinking, it's about doing, taking action.
You're right. Self-transcendence, he calls it. Real meaning comes from directing our energy outward, not inward, towards something bigger than ourselves.
So contributing to something greater, whether it's work, relationships, our community.
Exactly. It doesn't have to be some huge thing. Even everyday acts of kindness, those can make a difference, connect us to others, make the world a little bit better.
It's remarkable, his ideas came from such a dark place, but they're so applicable to everyday life.
It's a roadmap for navigating life's ups and downs, finding meaning even when things are hard. And it's something anyone can use.
That's a powerful message. I think a lot of people struggle with that idea of finding meaning in suffering, especially in a culture that's so focused on avoiding pain.
It is a tough concept. Frankl's not saying we should seek out suffering or pretend it's a good thing, but it's often unavoidable, right? And when we face it, we have a choice in how we respond.
But how do you find meaning in those times without falling into that toxic positivity trap? That's what I think trips people up.
I think it starts with acceptance. Accepting that suffering is part of life. It doesn't mean you're weak or broken. It can even lead to growth, to empathy, compassion.
Like Frankl finding strength in the image of his wife.
Yeah.
He wasn't denying the horrible reality, but he found something that transcended the suffering.
Exactly. It's the power of connection, of love as a source of resilience.
When we're going through those tough times, we need those connections, those sources of love even more.
Absolutely. Meaning isn't always something we find on our own. It can be found in connection, in contributing to something larger than ourselves.
So once again, it's less about the solitary search and more about understanding our place in the bigger picture.
And realizing that meaning is something that's always evolving, something we cultivate throughout life.
That's a hopeful thought, isn't it? We have the power to shape our experience, to find meaning, even in the most unexpected places.
And that's a power no one can take away from us.
Even in the face of something as awful as what Frankl went through, that human need to find meaning, it doesn't go away. It can even grow stronger.
That's the heart of man's search for meaning.
A powerful message, both challenging and hopeful. It's been a really insightful conversation. And to our listeners, we want to hear from you. What parts of the book resonated with you? How do you see this will to meaning playing out in your own life? Share your thoughts, your questions, those aha moments. We're all in this together. Until next time, keep diving deep.